Good morning and welcome to the new edition of Dr.Lamba's Awakening Call. Modi is a very effective, very pragmatic, and almost a visionary leader. Almost, I said, because there are always some limitations. But by far, he is one of the best. But to elevate any leader and consider that leader to be God is a negation of the concept of democracy. No politician, howsoever good he may be, can be God. Let's be very clear about that. Politicians are not gods. Modi is a pragmatic, as I said, Prime Minister. But when I see him being called a god, as Chief Minister of Uttarakhand, Tirth Singh Rawat said the other day, a day will come when, like Ram and Krishna, people will worship Modi as a god. That was sickening. And if Modi wants to be respected as a leader of the world's largest democracy, then he must rid himself of those who compare him to God. This is demeaning. This is insulting. I have praised Modi for what he has done, whether it was demonetization, which people criticize, but his latest activity, his latest action in the COVID shows the urgency and the dexterity with which he handled it. We have noticed that India's public health system is among the worst in the world, and yet he did much more than the developed countries could do or could have done. There are other things for which Modi deserves to be praised. Swachh Bharat, where in India, what Nepal said, people defecate everywhere, they don't do any longer. His possible capability to provide clean running water in every village is something great. This should have happened long back, did not happen. But Modi had his list of priorities and he made efforts to ensure that those priorities are adhered to. And this statement of Rawat reminded me of Devkant Barua, the president of the Indian National Congress, who during the emergency day says, Indira is India, India is Indira. That sort of slavish attitude shows basic mental incapability of the Indians. Indians talk of freedom, political freedom, economic freedom, social freedom, affirmative action, upliftment of backward classes. But the most important thing is mental freedom. They are still thinking that the politicians, other rulers, are the gods, which is wrong. There were temples erected to the chief ministers in Tamil Nadu, like to Jayalalitha and the most corrupt people. As I said, Indra was compared to be Indra and India as Indira, as if there's no difference. So, how do you relate the mental development, the democratic attitudes to this deification? I'm reminded that before partition, before independence, the rulers of the secular states deemed to be considered as gods. And I've seen the statues of those kings being worshipped in some of the princely states. I'd gone to a place called Frisco and I was shocked to see women coming and placing flowers at the feet of the king's statue. I firmly believe that India has been ruined by the socialist policies. Undoubtedly, they were extremely useful at that time, but the policies need to be junked. So, when Nirmala Sitharaman talked of privatization, I was happy that they're coming to realize that the government has no business to be in business. And he has gone one step ahead of Atal Bihari Vajpayee. When Vajpayee wanted to privatize, he was afraid of using the word privatize. So the government chose the word disinvestment. Modi hasn't done that. He is honest to the core. And the sickening psychopathic statement of Rawat that Modi would be remembered like Ram and Krishna is a foolish remark. It only shows one thing, and that is abject subservience. And coming from a chief minister, it is something shocking. If he had chosen another week to make a stupid statement on women's days, attention might have been paid more to what he said now. Luckily, people were more engrossed in his statement about jeans, and they ignored this statement, which is good because some people might have thought him to be God. Indian constitution gave right to the people to decide that they are the makers of their destiny. So how can a political leader who is a creation of the voters be gods? It is sad that for the last 50 years, India was ruled by an elected dynasty, that the members of the dynasty thought so highly of themselves that today there is not a town, not a city, not a village in India in which some building or some scheme is not named after some member of the dynasty. Modi should remember that one reason is one was people were tired of the dynasty. So he should ensure that that sort of darbar which Gandhi's had does not function in India any longer. And he also doesn't have minions, slaves who propound such stupid ideas that he is in God, that he is a God. By allowing his ministers and the chief ministers to behave like that, by permitting the trolls to criticize and condemn anybody who criticizes him, is wrong. But as I said, I have always praised Modi. But here I'm criticizing him because he should have immediately hauled up Rawat and told him this is not acceptable. There are leaders in the world who want servility. They want sycophants. But then they are not the leaders of the democracy. They have been elected. But they surround themselves with the people who compare them to God and Messiahs. Saddam was one. Gaddafi was another. But is Modi to be deemed at par with them? That would be a sad day. Despots and tin pot dictators can call themselves God, but not democratic leaders. So he should begin by sacking the chief minister of Uttarakhand, who has proved himself to be a singular idiot. But then that's not enough. As a democratic elected leader, there have been criticism of Modi, which may be correct, may not be correct, and it's partly not correct, that the current BJP government is autocratic. Now, let me be clear that this comment today is in fact a sort of an appraisal of Modi, whether he's a god or a human being, whether he's autocrat or a dictator, and a dictator or a democrat. We have seen that he is not a god. He is a visionary, yes. He is pragmatic, yes. He is a leader who has clear ideas, yes. But he is no god. And we don't need gods. We need human beings. If he was a god, then he would not have empathy for the people. Then he would be living in the ivory towers or on the top of Sumeru Hill or Himalayas and not bother the people. Now, the liberals, the social activists call Modi a dictator. Are they wrong? or other right. But let's not forget that he was elected by the people, and anywhere in the world, the elected leader, especially when you are elected with this majority, have a right to do what he says. The criticism that a country is partly free, as said by the freedom, or what the Swedish Wiedem said is electoral autocracy. Tell me, is the president of USA not an elected autocracy? He has more power. Is the Prime Minister of Canada not having the same power? Or rather, he has more powers. He can nominate a Governor General. In India, at least you elect the head of the state. So the government fulminating against the international custodians is justified. But beyond the echo chamber of Twitter, there is hardly any mass citizen anger. Even these farmers' protests are not an anger against Modi per se. They are against BJP, they are against RSS, they are against government, but not against Modi per se. So the Indian voters normally do not punish political leaders for violating democratic rights. No, let's be very clear about that. This is because of the slavish attitude that the Indians had, maybe as a result of having lived for centuries under autocratic rulers, or maybe because of the social attitudes. In 1977 election, held after emergency, Indira Gandhi was defeated in North India, but she still dominated in the South and got 34.5% votes there. And voila, she won the next election. They say sedition cases are used. Maybe they are. Maybe they are a bit on the higher side. But isn't the rebellion and the criticism and the call for breaking up India or for glorifying and putting the terrorists on the pedestal, saying that we are the killers of a hanged terrorist? Isn't that bad? Isn't that anti-national? And then the regional parties in India. Are they the stars of democracy? We have talked of the Congress party, which is a dynasty hold in Bengal. In 2012, a Yadavpur University professor was jailed for circulating a cartoon of Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee. Was that not dictatorial? Another scientist was arrested, and the ruling Tremul went on thumping win in Bengal 2016 elections. So this has been a part of India's system that once you elect a government, even it's of autocratic, and as a matter of fact, I remember going to a village at one time, and somebody said it was Indira Gandhi's opposition. They said she is a dictator. And one elderly person, a sarpanch of that area, said, Hukumat dande se hoti hai, you can rule with baton. So Pew Research has surveyed that 55% Indians support a strong man is proving to be a strong ruler. And now let's come to the basic point. A strong ruler need not be a dictator, is not essentially a dictator. Let's be clear. Over the Indians, the Indians in the last few years, they have become very habituated to the display of the state power. You remember in 1951, Nehru's government, just 1 year after the constitution was implemented, they brought the first amendment, and it was abridgment of the people's right to free speech. India was among the first countries in the world to ban Salman Rushdie's book, Satanic Verses, in 1989. Now, wasn't that being dictatorial? When Mrs. Gandhi, as the head of the Congress party, she was not Prime Minister, dismissed Namboodiripad regime in Kerala, was that not dictatorial? Simply because it was a communist party, they had to throw that out. So, right from the beginning, the leaders have been using storm arm methods, culminating with, as I said, Mamta's hand sending the university professors to jail for circulating a cartoon. There are two reasons why it happens. You can't blame Modi. First is that when populist nationalism reigns supreme, and it's the habit of the politicians to give free things, free electricity, free water, as it's happening in Delhi with Kejriwal, then who cares about the democracy and upholding leaders accountable? Till now, when you go and talk to people who say, well, he's giving us free electricity, well, he's giving us free water, they don't know whether he is accountable for his actions or not, if he's giving free electricity from where the money is coming. Ultimately, they are paying through the higher taxes because the money comes from the taxpayer. It doesn't come from the personal wealth of the leaders. And when the public life is highly polarized, it's impossible to build a consensus on what constitutes a danger to freedom. Indians have always liked to wear the democratic credentials on the sleeve. But as a people, we have very little appetite to force government to be transparent to the people. This transparency is visible now. Once the governments are transparent, then the democracy is there. But even this government has failed to implement fully transparent policies. You know, the non transparent electoral bonds that are funding elections is the most hateful thing, and Modi should ban it. But then, rather rewriting history books, one has to climb out of the mass acceptance of unfreedom. You have got to make India's constitution a mandatory reading in the schools. That would be an important first step in making people understand why democratic institutions are vital to the liberty of India. Why we need legal liberties to speak, to write, to think, associate, do business, protest, campaign, fall in love, marry, worship, dress, and eat they want. Who the hell is any chief to tell us that we are wearing torn jeans? I'm no lover of torn jeans, but I will protect the right of the people who wear torn jeans fully. Then, if the ruling party has the requisite majority in parliament, then the bill passed introduced by the government is always passed. Otherwise, it's a vote of no confidence. So if the bills are being passed and if the opposition is behaving irresponsibly, if their only agenda is to oppose the government, then the government would also use its brute majority to write roughshod. So it's not dictatorial. It is a display of your capabilities, and that is what is required. This is not to say that there is no role for opposition. As a matter of fact, opposition has a very defined role. It has to be a watchdog of the citizens on the doing of the government. But is it doing so? Does it study the nitty gritty of the bills? No. Simply because a bill is introduced, they consider it their bounden duty to pass. Imagine, even triple talaq was opposed. When the triple talaq was sought to be abolished, it was opposed. For no reason but to curry favor. So what we need, and the opposition needs, is a detailed understanding of the bills, and then a sensible reaction to that. But if the opposition's only agenda is to block and reject what the government does, Then, if the government behaves like a road roller, then it's not being dictatorial. It is getting the job done for which it was elected to do. Abolition of triple talaq, as I talked of, abrogation of Article 370, resolution of Ayodhya dispute. These are the major achievements of Modi, but they do not show that he is anti-democrat or is dictatorial. I don't deny that government has followed the laws. Otherwise, the Supreme Court, with its absolutely obtrusive attitude, would have said that these laws are ultra virus. They are against the Constitution. So having a comfortable majority in Lok Sabha is not an evil. It is an expression of the desire of the people to get what they want. But debate is one of the most important aspects, and that is missing in India. Now, tell me, if Modi was a dictator, he would have said, okay, there'll be no debate. But then the debate has been limited because both quality wise and quantity wise, in public place and in parliament, the opposition is not playing its role. But at the same time, let me tell you, I'm not denying that even the government is partly at fault. Even they are not interested in debate. But then, isn't that a part of the social setup and social ethos? At the cost of destroying a lot of feathers, opposition should ensure a constructive debate. It's their responsibility. As I said, they are the watchdogs. And if they are failing, you can't blame Modi for the failing of that party. Because they have to get over that. Now, this state of affairs in democracy is that the contribution of opposition is zero today. They mistakenly assume that everything was honky donkey before coming in of Modi and BJP, which was not. They have failed to gauge the mood of the resurgent India. And the net result is that the majority of the nation doesn't stand with them. And that troubles them. And the best way is to outflank and attack Modi for being dictatorial without considering the reality. The sad truth is that democracy is misused both by the government and by the opposition, but the responsibility of the opposition is much more. A democratic India needs a strong, buoyant, constructive opposition. And that should see that the nation is run properly, irrespective of which political party runs it. But Modi has again got to be careful that he is a democratic leader and his attitude should be democratic. He should ensure that the sort of deification or giving godly appearance to him or to his party or to his actions is not only discouraged, is condemned with all the force that he can muster. Otherwise, you can be sure that this is going to be a disaster for the country. Let me say again, he is a pragmatic leader, he is a sensible leader, but he is no God. Gods have ultimately feet of clay, and they are a disaster. I hope Indian democracy is saved from this disaster, and the responsibility of this lies with Modi more than with anybody else. Thank you.